Hello, everybody. This is Marius Free from Green Pro, and I have been trying for a while to make a video that can help somebody to think through his requirements and to prepare for a discussion with a good installer for quite a while now. And every time I make a video, I'm not happy with it. So this is another attempt. Let's have a go at it and see if this works better than the previous attempts. What I want to talk about is what I call the must-have functionality that you need for a solar and a backup system. And note here, I am focusing about here on a system that you want to use for backup, but you want to add solar as well. So your goal is to have power during load shedding as well as save on electricity, even if it's not on day one, but you have to buy the right equipment on day one so that if you want to save electricity later and you want to add panels or you even want to go off grid, this is the sort of things that you have to think about. Let's start off by taking a view of your electrical consuming devices that you have in your house. For those of you who've been watching my videos or any of my videos before, you know that I always use this depiction of a system which includes the non-critical loads in your house. These are devices that uses a lot of power, but they're not really needed during load shedding. In other words, you can do with them for 2, 3, or without them rather, for 2, 3, 4 hours. On the other side of the scale, you have critical loads. These are devices that use very little power, but you really want them. That it irritates you if you don't have them during load shedding. And here we're talking about LED lights, a TV and a decoder. If you work from home, especially a PC and a laptop, for security, you want alarms. A garage door opener is quite a pain if that doesn't work. You want that to work, and then fridges and freezers because you don't want meat that has gone off or any case. So your critical loads is the ones that you want on a battery backup system, and your non-critical loads are the ones that you don't necessarily want on a battery backup system. But what you do want is you do want the advantage of power coming from your solar panels. You want that advantage to be there for your critical loads as well as your non-critical loads. And the reason is because these are the low power consuming devices. If you only get an advantage of solar power for, let's call this is 10% of your electricity consumption. If you only have the advantage of solar power for critical loads, then you lose out on 90% of the advantage that you should be getting from your solar panels. So there's two pieces of functionality that is extremely important. The first one is the battery system, which is lithium ion. Don't even think about lead acid technologies like gel, etc. You want your batteries to be able to communicate to your inverter. That means two things. They both have to be able to communicate, but more important, they have to be able to communicate with each other. In other words, they have to use the same language, or technically we talk about the same protocol. So it's not just good enough if this can communicate and that can communicate. They have to be able to communicate to each other. Um, so that is a very critical requirement. Otherwise, you can't control a lithium-ion battery properly. The second thing is to be able to utilize solar power for non-critical load. This inverter has to be able to push power back to your non-critical loads. And if it cannot do that, then you are busy buying the wrong inverter. And let me just summarize by saying, if you buy a Chinese inverter, now Chinese inverters are all called experts, most of the ones in the country. They're all made by a company, Voltronics. If you want to import a container of those things, they'll ask you, what do you want the name to be? And then you say, I want it to be called Mercer or Kodak or RCT or 20 other names. They'll write any name on it that you want. They'll paint it any color that you want it to be. They're all the same inverter and they all cannot push back. So you're wasting your time with them. Don't buy a Chinese inverter. Let me just put that plain and simple. So I think by now you would have noted that the most important component in your system is your inverter. Um, the most expensive component is probably the batteries. But the most important one that is going to dictate the performance of your system is the inverter. So make sure you buy the right inverter. By the way, you also get a SunSync derivative, which is called a DAY or DAYA, or I think it's DEYE or something like that. The people flogging them will try to convince you that it's the same as the SunSync. It is not. The hardware is probably very close, but the software, I think it was frozen in 2018, but I stand corrected. In other words, if you buy a Daya inverter, you buy a SunSync inverter whose software was frozen 4 years ago. And SunSync has made a hell of a strides in terms of functionality in the last 4 years. So don't buy a Daya. It's not worth the little bit of money that you save. So let's look at some of the basic functionality that you need and that you need to specify when you have a discussion with a potential installer of a system for you. By the way, a lot of people go to shops and then they buy this equipment over the counter. They think they're going to save money. These shops are, if anything, probably more expensive than an installer, and then you sit with the equipment in your boot. You don't know how to install them, you don't know how to set them up, and all you're doing is creating a lot of problems for yourself. Get a proper installer that knows what he's doing and let him provide the equipment and put the system in for you. So let's get on with the functionality that you need. Um, First of all, as I said, you need power to be pushed back. Now, one of the things you need when you push power back is you need to control whether or not the power is being pushed into the street, I would call it. In other words, pushed towards Eskom. Whether it's a municipality of Eskom, it's Eskom power. So you need to be able to control the power that you push back past your meter into the street. So that's the first requirement that you must have. The second thing is, and I just named the result here, is that you want the benefit of solar. So when you push back, it's got to be able to go to the non-critical loads. I think we've said enough about that. Then I've also mentioned that you want accurate battery information, and to have accurate battery information, like all lithium-ion batteries does have, is they have a battery management system which knows exactly what's going on inside the battery, and it has to be able to communicate that to the inverter. Right, then we're talking here about load shifting. If you start thinking about bigger systems, in other words, you want to get serious about this, and you're even thinking in the long term of going off grid. Remember, you got to think about your end game here. Don't just think about what you need right now. You got to buy the right equipment because certain things you can't change. So load shifting is when you take power generated by the panels and you save that in your batteries. Then when the sun goes down, you take the power from your batteries and you take that back through the inverter and you feed it to the critical loads. Now, that would then extend the number of hours that you actually get the benefit of solar on your critical loads. Just one thing that I'm thinking of now that you also have to be aware of. If you cannot push power back to your non-critical loads. Remember I said that the critical loads are the ones that uses very little power, and this uses a lot of power. So if you can only push power from the inverter, the power being generated by the solar panels, if you can only push it to the critical loads, let's say critical load is 10-15% of your total power consumption, then you're only saving electricity on 10-15% of your power consumption. If you push it back here, you can save electricity on the other 85%. And that is why I get these calls from people saying, I'm not really saving money and I've put in this whole system. The reason is that if your inverter can't push power back, you don't get the benefit on 85% of your electricity consuming items. And yes, okay, so you'll save 50% on 10%, so you'll save 5% as much as you could have saved if your inverter were capable of pushing back. So yeah, that's just another reason why pushing back power, which is what I call a proper hybrid inverter. You have to get a proper hybrid inverter if you're thinking solar and battery. So here, obviously, you benefit from solar, and you also benefit from the battery. So this is the backup power that you're going to have in your system when you have load shedding. So that is the fundamental functionality that you've got to that you got to understand, and that you have to discuss with somebody when you want to buy a system. I think overall, there is one requirement when you want to buy a system. Don't buy a system over the counter, because you're paying more for the equipment and you get no advice and you get no installation, and you get a guy that stares at you because yesterday he was still selling chips and now he's selling um, backup systems at the hardware store or at whatever solar store you went to or online, um, and you get absolute zero advice, you get zero accountability. So don't buy a system from somebody over a counter, buy it from a good solar installer that knows what he's talking about. Unfortunately, that limits you probably to 2% of the people in the trade who are actually busy installing the backup and solar systems nowadays. Remember, there's a lot of them that were in 1970, they were selling TV antennas, and they've since progressed towards putting in computer networks, and now they're selling solar and backup systems. So as I mentioned in the beginning, my name is Marius Fourie, from GreenPro. We do turnkey projects. In other words, we design and install solar and backup systems. And if you're in the Johannesburg, Pretoria, or in the Natal North Coast area, please give us a call, and hopefully we can help you to get the right system.